Rain hammered against the apartment windows hard enough to make the glass shake. Outside, downtown Chicago looked cold, blurry, and drowned in white streetlights reflecting across the wet pavement. Cars hissed through puddles below, while thunder rolled somewhere over the city skyline. Clark Bennett stood alone in his tiny kitchen, stirring instant coffee while wearing gray sweatpants and an old hoodie that had seen better days. His apartment wasn't much: one bedroom, small living room, creaky floors, and a heater that worked only when it felt like it. But it was quiet. Too quiet most nights. At 24, Clark's life had settled into the same routine every day. Work at the bookstore. Come home. Microwave dinner. Watch random shows until midnight. Sleep alone. Repeat. Sometimes he wondered if this was just adulthood now. He carried his coffee toward the bed, pulling a blanket around himself while the storm outside grew louder. His phone buzzed once beside him. Another group chat notification he ignored. Then came a sudden knock at the door. Clark frowned immediately. Who the hell was visiting at midnight in weather like this? The knocking came again, louder this time. He carefully climbed out of bed and walked toward the apartment door. The hallway outside was silent, except for the rain echoing through the building windows. Clark unlocked the door slowly and froze. Anderson Cole stood there completely soaked from head to toe, dark hair dripping water onto the hallway floor. He wore a black jacket over a gray t-shirt that clung to his chest from the rain. A duffel bag rested over one shoulder while exhaustion sat heavily across his face. For a second, Clark genuinely thought he might be hallucinating. Anderson gave a tired smile. Hey, Clark. Clark stared at him in disbelief. He hadn't seen Anderson in almost 3 years. Back in college, Anderson had been the kind of guy everyone noticed the second he walked into a room. Confident without trying too hard. Funny. Attractive in an unfair, effortless way. He was also the older brother of one of Clark's old college friends. And unfortunately for Clark, he'd spent almost 2 years secretly crushing on him. A crush he never told anyone about. Now Anderson was standing at his apartment door, looking like a scene straight out of some romantic movie Clark definitely shouldn't compare this to. What are you doing here? Clark finally asked. Anderson rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. This is going to sound stupid, but my apartment flooded tonight. Pipe burst or something. Whole place is basically destroyed. Clark blinked. Seriously? Yeah. And every hotel downtown is booked because of that stupid music festival. Anderson laughed weakly before looking almost embarrassed. I remembered you live nearby. I know it's late, but can I stay here tonight? Clark's brain completely stopped functioning for about 5 solid seconds. Anderson, staying here, in his apartment, overnight. Clark quickly forced himself to act normal, even though his heart was trying to escape his chest. Yeah, he said too quickly. I mean, yeah, of course. Relief immediately crossed Anderson's face. Seriously? Thank you. Clark stepped aside to let him in. The second Anderson entered, cold rain air filled the apartment. He dropped the duffel bag near the couch and ran a hand through his wet hair. You look freezing, Clark said. I feel freezing. Clark disappeared into the bedroom and grabbed extra towels along with an oversized hoodie and sweatpants. When he handed them over, Anderson smiled softly. You still wear hoodies 3 sizes too big. Clark rolled his eyes. And you still notice weird things. Anderson laughed quietly. God, that laugh still did something dangerous to Clark's heart. A few minutes later, Anderson changed into the dry clothes while Clark tried very hard not to think about the fact that Anderson was literally changing in the next room. When Anderson finally walked out wearing Clark's hoodie, Clark nearly forgot how breathing worked. The hoodie fit him perfectly. Actually, worse than perfectly. Clark immediately looked away before Anderson noticed him staring. You hungry? Clark asked quickly. Starving. They ordered cheap takeout and sat on the bed, eating noodles while rain crashed against the windows. At first, the conversation stayed casual, work, college memories, mutual friends they no longer talked to. But slowly, things became easier, warmer. Clark found himself laughing more than he had in months. Anderson told stories dramatically with his hands while Clark kept catching himself staring at his smile. It was strange how natural everything felt, like no time had passed at all. Around 2 in the morning, Another loud thunder crack shook the apartment. Anderson looked toward the couch. So, about sleeping arrangements. Clark nearly choked on his drink. I can take the couch, he said immediately. Anderson glanced toward it and laughed. That couch is basically a medieval torture device. It's not that bad. Clark, I can literally see springs sticking out of it. Clark laughed nervously. There's enough room here, Anderson said casually, patting the bed. We're adults. We can survive sharing a bed for one night. Clark tried to respond normally. Instead, his brain screamed. Somehow he managed a week. Yeah, sure. 20 minutes later, the lights were off, and Clark was lying beside Anderson in complete darkness. Every tiny movement suddenly felt massive. The mattress shifted whenever Anderson moved. Clark could hear the soft sound of his breathing, could smell his shampoo. Outside, rain hammered endlessly against the windows while city lights flickered softly across the ceiling. Clark stared upward, fully aware that only inches separated them. Then Anderson spoke quietly into the darkness. You ever feel like your life turned out completely different than what you imagined? Clark swallowed. All the time. The silence afterward felt heavier somehow. Anderson exhaled slowly. I thought by 27, I'd have everything figured out. What happened? Another pause. Then Anderson admitted softly, my relationship ended a few months ago. Clark turned his head slightly toward him. I'm sorry. Yeah. Anderson gave a humorless laugh. Me too. Something about the sadness in his voice made Clark's chest ache. For the next hour, they talked quietly in the dark about things neither of them usually admitted out loud. Anderson confessed he felt lost lately, like he'd spent years pretending to be okay. Clark admitted he hated being alone more than he ever told people. The emotional distance between them slowly disappeared. Then lightning flashed outside. For one brief second, the room lit up bright enough for Clark to see Anderson already looking directly at him. Their eyes locked. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. The thunder that followed felt distant compared to the tension suddenly filling the bed between them. Clark's heartbeat became painfully loud. Anderson's voice dropped softer than before. I'm really glad you opened the door tonight. Clark's chest tightened instantly. Yeah, he whispered back. Me too. Neither of them slept much after that. Clark woke slowly to the sound of rain still tapping softly against the apartment windows. For a few seconds, he forgot someone else was there. Then he felt warmth beside him. His eyes opened carefully. Anderson was still asleep. Morning light slipped through the curtains in pale gray streaks, illuminating the messy dark hair falling across Anderson's forehead. One arm rested lazily over the blanket while his breathing stayed slow and peaceful. Clark's heart instantly betrayed him. He shouldn't have been staring this hard first thing in the morning. But it was impossible not to. Anderson somehow looked even more attractive half asleep, wearing Clark's oversized hoodie and looking completely comfortable in his bed like he belonged there. Clark quickly looked away before his brain embarrassed him further. Carefully, he slid out from under the blanket, trying not to wake him. The apartment floor felt freezing against his bare feet as he walked toward the kitchen. He started making coffee, mostly to calm himself down. Last night kept replaying in his head over and over. The conversation, the eye contact, the way Anderson's voice had softened in the dark. I'm really glad you opened the door tonight. Clark leaned against the kitchen counter and groaned quietly into his hands. This was dangerous, very dangerous, because the stupid crush he thought died years ago was suddenly very alive again. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Clark turned too quickly and nearly dropped the coffee mug. Anderson stood there rubbing sleep from his eyes, still wearing the gray hoodie and sweatpants Clark gave him. His hair was messy in the most unfairly attractive way possible. Morning, Anderson said with a sleepy smile. Clark forgot how words worked for half a second. Morning. Anderson walked into the kitchen, stretching lazily. The movement lifted the hoodie slightly, revealing part of his stomach before he adjusted it again. Clark immediately looked at the coffee machine like it personally needed supervision. You always wake up this early? Anderson asked. Only when there's a giant man stealing my bed. Anderson laughed softly. Your bed is comfortable. Clark muttered, glad somebody enjoys it. Anderson leaned against the counter beside him, close enough that Clark could smell his cologne mixed with coffee and laundry detergent. It was distracting in the worst possible way. "You blush really easily, you know that?" Anderson said suddenly. Clark nearly inhaled his own coffee. "I do not. You literally turned red just now. It's hot in here." Anderson looked around the freezing apartment. "Clark, I can see my breath." Clark rolled his eyes while Anderson grinned victoriously. The teasing somehow made everything feel lighter. Normal, like they've been doing this for years. They ended up eating breakfast together while rain continued pouring outside. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to leave the apartment. Around noon, Anderson checked his phone and sighed. "My building manager says repairs might take a few days." Clark tried very hard not to sound excited. "Oh, guess you're stuck with me a little longer." Clark looked down at his coffee cup to hide his smile. "Tragic." Anderson laughed again. God, Clark was in trouble. The weather stayed terrible all afternoon, so they remained inside watching movies from Clark's laptop while sitting against the headboard on the bed. At first there was space between them, then slowly less space. By the second movie, Anderson's shoulder brushed against Clark's. Neither of them moved away. By the third movie, Anderson stretched casually and rested his arm along the back of the bed behind Clark. Clark's entire body immediately became hyper-aware. His heartbeat sped up so hard he was convinced Anderson could hear it. But Anderson acted completely relaxed. Too relaxed. Clark tried focusing on the movie, but that became impossible the second Anderson leaned closer and quietly said, "This movie sucks." Clark laughed nervously. "You picked it." "Yeah, and I regret everything." Their faces were suddenly much closer than before. Clark could feel warmth radiating from him. For one terrifying second, he thought Anderson might actually kiss him. Instead, Anderson smiled softly and looked back toward the screen. Clark almost died from disappointment. Later that evening, they ordered burgers and sat cross-legged on the bed eating while music played quietly from Clark's speaker. The conversation drifted naturally toward relationships. Clark regretted bringing it up almost immediately. "So," he asked carefully, "how long were you with your ex?" Anderson looked down for a moment before answering. "Almost 3 years." "That's serious." "Yeah." Anderson gave a small shrug. "I thought it was forever." Clark blinked. "Boyfriend." Hearing Anderson say it out loud made something emotional twist painfully inside him. Not because he was surprised. Honestly, part of Clark had always wondered. But hearing confirmation suddenly made all those old college feelings come rushing back stronger than ever. Anderson noticed his expression immediately. "What?" Clark shook his head too fast. "Nothing." Anderson studied him carefully for a second before smirking slightly. "You know, you're really easy to read." "I'm literally not." "You literally are." Clark threw a fry at him. Anderson laughed harder. The sound filled the apartment warmly. A little while later, the teasing faded into softer conversation. Clark admitted he hadn't dated seriously in over a year. "Bad breakup?" Anderson asked quietly. Clark hesitated. "More like bad timing." Anderson nodded slowly, like he understood more than Clark was saying. "What about before that?" he asked. Clark stared down at his drink. "There was someone in college I liked for a long time." Anderson's expression shifted slightly. "Did he know?" Clark laughed awkwardly. "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because I was terrified." Anderson stayed quiet. Then he asked softly, "Was it someone I know?" Clark's heart nearly stopped. He immediately grabbed his drink to avoid eye contact. "Maybe." Anderson smiled faintly. "Interesting." Clark groaned. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Look mysterious." "I'm not looking mysterious." "You are literally doing it right now." Anderson laughed again, but this time there was something softer underneath it. Something warmer. Night slowly settled outside the apartment windows while rain continued falling across the city. Eventually they got ready for bed again. This time the nervousness felt different. Less awkward. More intimate. Clark climbed under the blanket first, tried to act normal while Anderson turned off the lights and slipped into bed beside him. The room felt quiet. Only the storm remained. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Anderson's voice appeared softly through the darkness. "You know something funny?" Clark swallowed. What? I always thought you were cute. Clark froze completely. His brain genuinely stopped functioning. What? Anderson shifted slightly toward him. Back in college, Clark stared into the darkness, absolutely speechless. You're joking. I'm not. Clark's chest tightened so hard it almost hurt. Years. He spent years believing those feelings were completely one-sided. You never said anything, Clark whispered. Neither did you. Fair point. Clark let out a shaky laugh while his pulse went completely insane. Then, carefully, slowly, Anderson reached over beneath the blanket until his fingers found Clark's hand. The touch was gentle, tentative, like he was waiting for Clark to pull away. Clark didn't. Instead, he slowly intertwined their fingers together. The silence afterward felt impossibly intimate. No jokes, no teasing, just warmth. Clark could feel Anderson's thumb brushing lightly against his hand in the dark, and neither of them let go before falling asleep. The days that followed didn't feel like a temporary situation anymore. Anderson didn't leave. At first, it was supposed to be just a couple of days until his apartment repairs were done. But one delay turned into another, and suddenly his bag stayed by the couch like it belonged there. And Clark stopped asking when he was going. That was the problem. Because somewhere between shared breakfasts and late-night movies, the apartment stopped feeling like Clark's alone space. It started feeling like theirs. Mornings became easier in a way Clark didn't know how to explain. Anderson would wake up first sometimes, walking barefoot into the kitchen, hair messy, stealing coffee like he owned the place. Other times Clark would wake up to Anderson already making breakfast, humming softly while flipping eggs like it was the most normal thing in the world. And every time Clark saw him like that, comfortable, close, real, his chest tightened in a way that made it hard to act normal. Anderson noticed everything. How do you manage to burn toast and still look stressed about it? Anderson teased one morning, leaning against the counter. Clark shot him a glare. It's called multitasking. It's called chaos. Clark tried not to smile. Failed anyway. The teasing became constant between them, like a language only they understood. But underneath it, something else was building. Something quieter, heavier. Every accidental touch lingered longer than it should have. A brush of fingers while passing a plate. Sitting too close on the couch, even when there was space everywhere else. And then there were the moments neither of them joked about afterward. Like the night they watched a movie too late, the room dark except for the glow of the screen. Anderson had leaned back, stretching one arm behind Clark again. This time, he didn't move it away. Clark didn't either. Halfway through the movie, Anderson shifted slightly closer, his shoulder now fully touching Clark's. Clark's breathing changed instantly. He tried focusing on the screen, but his attention kept slipping to the warmth beside him. Anderson's presence felt too close, too real, like it was slowly taking up more space than it should. Clark, Anderson said quietly during a quiet scene. Yeah. Are you actually watching this, or just pretending? Clark swallowed. I'm watching. Anderson hummed like he didn't believe him. Then, without warning, Anderson shifted again, just slightly, but enough that his knee brushed Clark's under the blanket. Clark froze. The air between them changed immediately. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was there. A tension that didn't belong to friendship anymore. Clark turned his head slowly. Anderson was already looking at him. Not smiling this time. Just watching. Like he was thinking the same thing Clark was refusing to admit. The movie kept playing in the background, forgotten. Neither of them moved away. Instead, Anderson lowered his voice. You've been acting weird lately. Clark let out a nervous laugh. I'm always weird. Not like this. Silence fell between them. Clark's heart was loud enough that he was sure Anderson could hear it. What do you mean like this? Clark asked, though he already knew. Anderson didn't answer right away. His eyes dropped for a second, then lifted again, softer now. Like you're trying really hard not to look at me when you think I'm not noticing. Clark's throat went dry. That was exactly what he had been doing. The room felt smaller suddenly, warmer. The space between them no longer felt safe in the same way. Clark should have joked, should have changed the subject, should have gotten up, but he didn't. Instead, he whispered, and if I am? And that was the moment everything shifted. Anderson didn't move immediately. He just exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for a long time. Then he turned slightly toward Clark, fully now. "Then stop pretending," Anderson said quietly. Clark's chest tightened. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence stretched until it didn't feel like silence anymore. It felt like waiting. His expression softened in a way Clark hadn't seen before. Less teasing, less confident, more real. "Clark," Anderson said gently, like he was asking permission without saying it. Clark didn't answer with words. He just moved, slowly at first, closing the small distance between them, like he was afraid it might disappear if he rushed it. Anderson didn't back away. If anything, he leaned in slightly too. Their breathing mixed in the space between them. Clark's gaze dropped to Anderson's lips for a fraction of a second before he could stop himself. Anderson noticed. Of course he did. His expression softened in a way Clark hadn't seen before. Less teasing, less confident, more real. "Clark," Anderson said gently, like he was asking permission without saying it. Clark didn't answer with words. He just moved, slowly at first, closing the small distance between them, like he was afraid it might disappear if he rushed it. Anderson didn't back away. If anything, he leaned in slightly too. Their breathing mixed in the space between them. And then it happened. The first kiss was soft, careful, almost uncertain, like both of them were still afraid it might not be real. But the second kiss wasn't. The second one came with emotion they had both been holding back for days, maybe longer. Anderson's hand moved to Clark's face, steadying him gently, as if he didn't want the moment to break. Clark felt his entire body relax into it, like something inside him had finally stopped resisting. When they pulled apart slightly, they were both breathing harder than before. Neither of them laughed. Neither of them joked. Anderson rested his forehead lightly against Clark's. "We really shouldn't have waited this long," he whispered. Clark let out a shaky breath. "Yeah," but neither of them moved away, because even after the kiss ended, the feeling between them didn't. It only got louder. The morning after the kiss didn't feel like a normal morning. It felt like the air itself had changed. Clark woke up first again, but this time he didn't immediately move. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how everything had shifted in such a short amount of time. Beside him, Anderson was still asleep. Same bed, same room, but nothing about it felt the same anymore. Clark turned his head slightly. Anderson was closer than before, face relaxed, breathing steady, one arm loosely resting between them like he had unconsciously reached for Clark in his sleep. That alone made Clark's chest tighten, because it wasn't just attraction anymore. It was something heavier, something that made staying feel easy and leaving feel impossible. Anderson stirred a few minutes later, blinking slowly as he woke up. The moment his eyes focused on Clark, a quiet realization passed between them. Like last night wasn't something either of them had imagined. Neither of them smiled at first. Not because it was bad, because it was real. "Hey," Anderson said softly. Clark swallowed. "Hey," a pause. Then Anderson shifted slightly closer, studying Clark's face like he was trying to figure out if anything had changed overnight. Clark answered that, without words, by reaching for him first. His fingers brushed Anderson's hand under the blanket. Anderson immediately laced their fingers together. Simple, natural, like they had been doing it for longer than they had. That small contact broke whatever tension was left. Anderson exhaled, a faint smile appearing. "So, we're not pretending that didn't happen, right?" Clark let out a quiet laugh. "I don't think I can pretend anything right now." "Good," Anderson said. Then he leaned in. The second kiss of the morning was slower than the night before. Less uncertain. More certain in a way that made Clark's head feel light. When they finally pulled apart, Anderson stayed close, forehead almost touching Clark's. "This is dangerous," Clark whispered, not pulling away. "I know," Anderson replied. But neither of them stopped. Days began to blur after that. Anderson's presence became normal in Clark's apartment in a way that scared him more than anything else. His clothes mixed with Clark's laundry. His toothbrush appeared next to Clark's sink. His voice became part of the background of Clark's life. And that was the problem, because Clark didn't just like him anymore. He was starting to rely on him. One evening, they went out together for the first time. Just a simple walk through downtown Chicago. The city lights reflected off wet streets, and cold wind pushed between buildings, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to go back inside. Anderson kept brushing his hand against Clark's casually at first, then more intentionally. Then eventually, he just held it, like it belonged there. Clark didn't question it anymore. At a small bridge overlooking the river, they stopped. The city hummed around them. Cars in the distance, distant music, wind moving through metal railings. Anderson leaned on the railing, looking out for a moment before speaking quietly. You ever think about how fast things can change? Clark glanced at him. Yeah. I used to think nothing really changed, Anderson said. People just stayed the same. Or left. Clark stayed silent, listening. Anderson turned slightly toward him now. But this, he continued, voice softer, this feels like it happened too fast. Clark's heart slowed, because he knew exactly what Anderson meant. Not regret. Fear. Clark looked down at their hands, still loosely connected. I'm scared too, Clark admitted quietly. Anderson didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that Clark could feel his warmth even through the cold air. I don't want this to be temporary, Anderson said. Clark's breath caught slightly. Neither do I. A pause, long enough for the city to feel like it disappeared around them. And then Anderson reached up gently, touching Clark's cheek like he needed to make sure he was real. Then don't run from me when it gets complicated, he said. Clark let out a small, shaky breath. I won't. That was the moment the fear changed shape. It didn't disappear. It just became something they carried together instead of alone. When they kissed again that night, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't uncertain. It was steady, like a promise they didn't fully know how to say out loud yet, but were already choosing anyway. And when they finally pulled apart, Anderson stayed close and whispered, almost like a confession he didn't want the world to hear. I think I'm already too far in. Clark smiled softly against him. Me too. Winter arrived fully in Chicago, covering the city in cold wind and pale skies that made the streets feel quieter than usual. But inside Clark's apartment, things were no longer quiet in the same way. They were warm. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just alive. Anderson never officially moved out. At some point, it stopped being a temporary stay and started becoming a shared life neither of them had talked about labeling yet. His bag stayed in the corner, then slowly disappeared into Clark's closet. His presence stopped feeling like a guest presence. It felt permanent. Clark noticed it most in the small things. The way Anderson always made coffee for two without asking. The way he reached for Clark's hand automatically while passing through doorways. The way he looked at Clark in the morning, not like someone passing time, but like someone choosing to stay. One night, snow fell heavily outside the windows, soft and endless, covering the city in white silence. Inside, Anderson and Clark sat on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket, watching a movie they weren't really paying attention to. Clark's head rested against Anderson's shoulder, and Anderson's hand rested on Clark's knee like it had been placed there naturally and forgotten there on purpose. At some point, the movie stopped mattering completely. Clark whispered, "It doesn't feel like my apartment anymore." Anderson didn't look away from the screen. "Does that bother you?" Clark thought for a moment, then shook his head slightly. "No." A pause. "It feels like home," he added quietly. That made Anderson turn his head. Slowly, like he wanted to be sure he heard it right. "Home," Anderson repeated. Clark nodded again, this time more certain. Anderson didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he tightened the blanket around them both a little more, then leaned down and kissed Clark's forehead, soft, lingering, like he was holding on to the moment instead of letting it pass. "I like that," Anderson said quietly. Clark smiled faintly, eyes closing for a moment. Time passed in that gentle way it does when nothing feels urgent anymore. Late that night, they moved to the bed together without thinking about it anymore. There was no hesitation now, no awkward distance, just familiarity. Clark turned off the lamp, and the room sank into soft darkness filled only with the sound of winter wind outside the window. Anderson lay beside him, closer than before, one arm naturally slipping around Clark's waist as if it had always known where to go. Clark turned slightly toward him, and for a while they just stayed like that, breathing together, existing together. Then Anderson spoke quietly into the dark. "I was thinking today," he said. "About what?" A pause. Then Anderson continued, voice lower, softer. "If I hadn't knocked on your door that night, I think I would have kept missing this." Clark didn't respond immediately, because something tight formed in his chest at the thought. All the near misses, all the years of not saying anything, all the moments that could have gone differently. He shifted closer instead, until there was no space left between them. "You didn't miss it," Clark whispered. "You found it." Anderson held him a little tighter, like that answer mattered more than anything else. Outside, snow continued falling over Chicago, covering streets, cars, rooftops, turning everything into silence. But inside that room, inside that bed, nothing felt silent. It felt complete. And when Anderson kissed him that night, it wasn't rushed or uncertain or emotional in a chaotic way. It was steady, certain, like coming home after a long journey without realizing you were lost. Clark didn't think about tomorrow, or fear, or distance. For the first time, he didn't think at all. He just stayed.